Hello and happy Pride and Prejudice. It's me, Mrs. Schroeder. I'm going to go ahead and first, I know you love my bonnet. I had to run to the school and grab it. But we're going to work on chapters 37 and 38 today. So let's get started. First of all, question number 1. What did Elizabeth have to smile about when she went back to Rosings and next saw Lady Catherine? Obviously, what did she smile about? She smiled about the fact that Mr. Darcy had just proposed and that Lady Catherine was going on and on about how sad he was that Darcy had to leave and when Elizabeth knew the truth. Question number 2, what did Lady Catherine instruct Elizabeth to do so that she could stay longer at Rosings? Lady Catherine instructed Elizabeth to write to her mother and stay for an amount of time. And Elizabeth's like, oh. And Lady Catherine said, well, you know your mother can't really miss you with 4 sisters besides you. And she said, yes, but my father does. So I need to go back and see my dad. And Lady Catherine was like, wait a second, don't talk back to me. But she did. Number 3, I have the question standing up, so I don't have to keep looking down. Question 3, who wanted Elizabeth to return home? I've already covered that. It was Mr. Bennet. Number 4, what was the irony of Lady Catherine making sure Georgiana had 2 more manservants for protection with her in Ramsgate the previous summer? As we know, Georgiana had a very eventful summer at Ramsgate, and Lady Catherine went on and on about how a proper lady would not have few manservants. And so she said that she sent 2 additional manservants from Rosings to help take care of Georgiana. Didn't do anything because Georgiana must elope with George Wickham. So Lady Catherine, the irony is the fact that she thinks she has everything under control, and she really doesn't. Question number, I know somebody's saying, Miss Schroeder, Mama Schro, it's this. Number 5, what indicates to us that Elizabeth read Mr. Darcy's letter often? It states right here that she almost knew it by heart. And the fact that she almost knew it by heart indicates to us that she did read it quite frequently. Number 6, what made Elizabeth's anger turn against herself? Okay, I'm going to read this quote directly. There's my book. I know you guys miss seeing it. I know you do. It's okay. But when she considered how unjustly she had condemned and upbraided him, her anger was turned against herself, and his disappointed feelings became the object of compassion. If you recall, originally, she had no compassion. Originally, she didn't feel guilty for how she had treated him, but recognizing who really was the better man in the situation between him and Wickham, and also recognizing that she was wrong. She had misjudged him. It made her feel horrible. So she did feel guilty, and she did have compassion on his poor nerves. Let's go ahead and continue on with question number 7. Describe Elizabeth's honest evaluation of her family. Excuse me. Her father, contented with laughing at them, would never exert himself to restrain the wild giddiness of his youngest daughters, and her mother, with manners so far from right herself, was entirely insensible of the evil. Elizabeth had frequently united with Jane in an endeavor to check the imprudence, of Catherine and Lydia. But while they were supported by their mother's indulgences, what chance could there be of improvement? Catherine was weak-spirited, irritable, and completely under Lydia's guidance. She had always been affronted by their advice, and Lydia, self-willed and careless, would scarcely give them a hearing. They were ignorant, idle, and vain. This also shows not only Lydia and Catherine's follies, they're young girls. And if you think about it, and Elizabeth's real motivation and her real frustration and anger is not just with her younger sisters, it's with her parents, because her parents are unwilling to take responsibility for the way that the girls behave, especially Mr. Bennet. Some allowance can be given because Mrs. Bennet was not a gently born woman. She's the daughter of a commoner, so to speak, although they're all commoners, not with royal blood ties. But Mrs. Bennet does not behave the way that a gentleman's wife should behave, but she doesn't know any different. And so Mr. Bennet really is at fault the most for not taking his wife in hand and making sure that his daughters are taken in hand and they behave the way that they probably and properly should behave. Okay, let me look at the next question for you. Number 8, what did Elizabeth finally attribute Jane's loss of Bingley to? She really attributed it to her family. How grievous then was the thought that of a situation so desirable in every respect, so replete with advantage, so promising for happiness, Jane had been deprived of the folly by the indecorum and folly of her own family. So she's saying it was our fault. It was not Darcy and Bingley's fault. It was our fault. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. And I know you're like, oh, crud, she's going off on a tangent. Possibly. Did I show you I married my Mr. Darcy shirt? Yeah, Shro has a shirt that says, I am Mr. Darcy, but I know. He only wears it, like, it's my birthday. He'll wear it. He's like, okay, babe, I'll wear it. I do want to talk about that question again. Number 8, what did Elizabeth finally attribute Jane's loss of Bingley to? But I also want to point something else out. I want to point out that although we know for a fact, and Mr. Darcy has voiced the statement that, yes, he was part of the reason. He and the de Bourgh sisters, I'm sorry, scratch that, the Bingley sisters, Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley, helped hide Jane's being in London, but also encouraged Bingley that Jane had no feelings for him. But, and I think I mentioned this in one of the classes, but it's been a long time since I've seen you, so please bear with me. Bingley's a man. He's a man. If he can't make the decision of who he wants to marry himself and stick with it himself, Elizabeth, do you really want your sister to marry that guy? I wouldn't want to be married to a man that has to take advice from every other person before he can make a decision. No. You want someone that's strong. You want somebody that's going to stick up for you. And if you think about their personalities, Jane seems very docile. She seems very quiet and pliable. She does what people want her to do. And so does Bingley. So it's almost as if they need... Who knows if they're going to be a good match, obviously, because it's Jane Austen and she's not going to put two horrible people together. There's another book that you could read that would answer that and refute that, but we're not going into that one. Elizabeth blames this on Darcy so much, but it's almost as if this moment she's starting to recognize that Bingley is culpable. Because once again, if Bingley was a man and he really wanted to marry Jane, nobody could stop him. Nobody could stop him. And it's true. He didn't make the decision to go back to Netherfield. He allowed others to make the decision for him. He's weak. And is that really what you want for your sister? All right, let's go ahead and move on to number 9. What developments would seem to have made a normally happy Elizabeth almost depressed? Well, let me open up my little notations. Number 9. When to these recollections was added the development of Wickham's character, it may be easily believed that the happy spirits which had seldom been depressed before were now so much affected as to make it almost impossible for her to appear tolerably cheerful. She realized that she'd made a huge mistake. And not only did she make a huge mistake, but her family did. Her family has set about ruining the happiness of Jane. Jane, who is so kind and so loving and would never do anything to hurt another person, she won't have her happily ever after because of the family. And so Elizabeth feels guilty about that. And she feels like, oh, I can't believe my family did this. But then to compound it with Mr. Wickham's behavior and how she touted his amiability and how wonderful he was and what a snake Darcy was, when it turns out it was flipped. And there's a conversation, and I know you've already read it, but there's a conversation between Jane and Elizabeth, and please excuse that misquotation because I'm sure it'll happen. But Elizabeth is talking to Jane and she explains what's going on to Jane. And Jane's like, no, maybe there's just a misunderstanding. And Elizabeth says, no, Jane, you can't make both of them good. They can't both be good. One has all the goodness and the other all the appearance of it. And I think that might be one of the questions. But if you think about it, it's true. Darcy has all the goodness. He just seems like a jerk. And Wickham has all the appearance of goodness, but he is the jerk. So that's that. And finally, question number 10 for chapter 37. Why did Maria Lucas repack all of her gowns before she departed from Hunsford? Because Lady Catherine had lectured them on the proper way to pack gowns. And so Maria went into her room and unpacked all of her suitcases or her trunks, took everything out and decided she had to repack them the way Lady Catherine said to repack them. And Elizabeth is like, Lady Catherine's never going to know. Why are you doing this? But Mariah's like, I just have to do it. I have to do it. Because once again, Mariah falls under the category of being very pliable, being very receptive to others' criticism. And that's another difference between Elizabeth and Mariah, or Elizabeth and Jane. And that is one of the appeals that Darcy sees in Elizabeth. Okay, so we'll stop there. That's chapter 37. I will do another one of chapter 38. Actually, there's only 5 questions for chapter 38. So chapter 38. And you could probably hear my boys. They're laughing downstairs. Sorry. Question number 1. How long had Elizabeth been visiting Mr. and Mrs. Collins? She had spent 6 weeks, so a month and a half, visiting at Hunsford. Number 2, what did Mr. Collins believe about his and Charlotte's marriage? Oh, it's so gross. We seem to have been designed for each other. Zoinks. Poor Charlotte Lucas. Honey, if that's what you're designed for, you need some help. Let's continue on with question number 3. What was Elizabeth's thought when Mariah enthusiastically stated, how much I will have to tell? And Elizabeth's response, which makes perfect sense, is how much I will have to conceal. She can't tell Jane. She can't tell other people what happened. Yes, she'll probably tell Jane that Mr. Darcy proposed to her. Obviously, sisters do that. Best friends do that. But she can't tell Jane about Mr. Darcy breaking up Bingley and Jane, because Elizabeth is starting to feel not tender feelings for Mr. Darcy, but she's starting to understand him a little bit better. And especially with all of the stress and the strain, as we spoke about, with Georgiana's near elopement. And so now she can understand his behavior, and she's seen him in better spirits around Colonel Fitzwilliam. And so she doesn't want Jane to hate Mr. Darcy, if that makes sense. It makes sense to me. Let's look at number 4. How long did it take them to reach Sorry, typo, just saw that. How long did it take them to reach Mr. Gardner's house? 4 hours after leaving Hunsford, they reached Mr. Gardner's house. So Mr. Gardner's house is in London, and Lady Catherine's estate of Rosings is in Kent. Now, to be very honest with you, it would take you maybe 20 minutes to a half an hour to reach the estate, or to reach London, depending on what side of London. If we're talking London, like South London, it's about half an hour, 20 minutes, depending. But if you were going all the way to the northern part of London, it would take a little bit longer. But still, we have good roads. We have automobiles. We didn't have muddy, rutted roads with a carriage being, pulled by 1 or 2 horses, depending on what the carriage, whose carriage it was. And it was a rented carriage, I believe. Number 10. Oh, backtrack. Go to chapter 38. Sorry. Number 5. Why was Elizabeth torn about revealing the story to Jane of Darcy's proposal? Once again, it goes back to what she knew she would have to conceal. And she felt so much sadness for Jane, and she didn't want to give too much away, because she shouldn't even tell Jane that Mr. Darcy wrote her a letter. And so she's definitely going to conceal the part about Jane and Bingley, because she doesn't want Jane to hurt even more, knowing that Mr. Bingley did have feelings for her at one point, but now it's probably gone. Think about this. Okay, think about this. We're done with the questions. Please put the number correct at the top and pass them forward. Easton will be collecting those in a minute if I can have him stop drawing. But I want you to think about this. Why was Elizabeth torn about revealing the story to Jane of Darcy's proposal? She, going back to the whole concept of not having feelings for Mr. Darcy, but the idea of him, of knowing him better and understanding him better, she didn't want Jane's wounds to get ripped open fresh. Remember, this is April. Okay, this is Easter. This is April. They haven't seen Bingley since November 26th. And we know about that, and you'll find out why as we continue. But November 26th was the night of the ball. So November, December, January, February, March, April. It's been 5 months. Think back to 5 months ago, ladies and gentlemen. We are in the 3rd month of the year. So think back to Thanksgiving, the end of October. So Halloween, beginning of Thanksgiving. Think about that. Think of everything that's happened at this point. Mr. Bingley could be married. Yes, he really could. Mr. Bingley could have gone off to India for the East Indian Company. Mr. Bingley could have gone to the Americas because he's just been so depressed about Jane and found somebody else. And so Elizabeth doesn't want to rip open Jane's wound and make it fresh, but she also doesn't want to give her hope. And truthfully, Bingley could be married with children on the way by this point, because a lot of marriages happened lickety split, just like that. So that is the end of chapters 37 and 38. If you have any questions, please go ahead and send me a remind and I will respond to you privately. Please look for chapters 39 through 43 posted on YouTube. And there we go.